I was sitting with two sisters and one of their daughters after their father, a longtime member of my previous church, had died. And as always, they sat there, searching through the moments of silence and speaking, trying to find the words to express who this man, this father, grandfather, teacher, this child of earth and sky was. And as always, to weave together a fabric of someone's life, they turned to stories. Stories of identity and family, some true in not so literal ways, some complete lies that were somehow swept into the family canon of what was the story of their people. They spoke of this man as a lifelong learner, a teacher, a student of the natural world, a lover of wilderness and the landscapes of earth. They spoke of this man as loving and caring, tender and strong. And as the story goes that they told me, it was the 1940s, and they said, and Dad was walking on patrol in Europe with his comrades in the U.S. Army. It was not a pretty time. All around them was destruction and fear. Buildings crumbled, lives shattered or taken, communities abandoned from the devastation of war, the shattering of what had been beautiful and robust, vibrant communities of faith and culture and joy. And just a bit off in the distance, there was something else as they patrolled one night, breaking through the dense fog of destruction and despondency and death. Floating through the air was music. It was coming from a church not far off, like the sound of light spilling out of stained glass windows, covering the shards of a community with beauty and with joy and with art, if only for a few moments. And as they moved closer, the music became less faint and more clear. And right outside the window, as they moved through the broken streets of this town, this is some of what they heard. And with that, the young man, for the first time, found a lifetime love of classical music, this father of theirs. A love for beauty and hope and art and harmony right in the midst of destruction. Music and all that is like music, those intangible things of beauty and love and joy and hope and courage and art, spills out of windows to bless a broken world all the time. In whatever form it comes, stringed instruments, rhythmic drums, compassion and care for the injured, comfort expressed through poetry or journals, there is always hope, it seems, that seems to rise and spring out from the resilience of life right in the midst of what seems like lifelessness. Poets and artists of all cultures and times speak about how they bring something of their art out of their brokenness. Uninvited, unaided, unsanctioned oftentimes, writes Clara Barton. They pressed the lines. This sounds like a little bit of a description of my 1.5-year-old Clara, uninvited, unaided, unsanctioned at times in our house, going around, this clear, fierce little 1.5-year-old. And I have to express just a tiny bit of frustration at the Clara Barton Guild because I also have a daughter named Louisa. And Louisa is a little older, and as I was talking about what this service was going to be about, I said, Clara Barton. She's like my sister? It's like, yeah, that's who your sister was named after. And she said, Papa, I was named after Louisa May Alcott. And so you can expect Louisa May Alcott focused service in the coming months, so I can avoid some family mutiny, maybe another guild. But Clara Barton, we'll just focus on Clara. Clara Barton and others like her pressed and pushed the lines of social custom constantly to be present where few even wanted to be present, right in the midst of war-torn strife and suffering, offering heart and mind and strength and courage for the healing of soldiers right in the midst of the Civil War. As Joyce shared in the story this morning, her skill and her compassion for caring developed quite early on, caring for her brother for nearly 2 years, caring for animals on the farm. Like many who rise to significant leadership in the world for social change, Clara was shy and timid as a child, so much that her parents sent her to a boarding school to expand her beyond her social discomfort. But of course, that's not what happened there. She closed in further. She was put in a deeply uncomfortable experience. So later on, a phrenologist visiting the Barton family advised that Clara, in her late teens, should start teaching school to overcome her social anxiety. One would think, rightly so, that that's a horrible idea. But for whatever reason, she was ready, and it helped, and she broke stereotypes strategically, impressing the students with her abilities at baseball, or a clod of earth, as it said. In her own words, Clara Barton said, "When they found out that I was as agile and as strong as themselves, that my throw was as sure and as straight as theirs, their respect then knew no bounds." She demanded the same pay as men while teaching, and she received it. She demanded the same pay at the U.S. Patent Office as the men working there, and she received it. She worked with others working for women's suffrage, including Dorothea Dix, Unitarian, advocating for humane treatment of those living with mental illness compared to the asylum-style treatment of the day. She built an institution in the American and then International Red Cross through her clarity around care. Clara Barton was a universalist, and in that universalist spirit, she would care for anyone, regardless of righteous or moral purity or what side of the war even, and attended, in her words, to all of the wounded in her midst. An army surgeon spoke of her as she learned to remove bullets from soldiers. If heaven ever sent out a holy angel, she must be the one. Uninvited, unaided, unsanctioned. That's often how things or people or movements or teachings come into this world, or maybe into our lives. Something new, something important, something necessary becomes revealed. Some new truth or wisdom or practice presses through the lines of social conformity, uninvited and unaided and unsanctioned. She brought into this world truths about fair pay and treatment, about the right to vote and the leadership of women. She took the teachings of universalism and expanded them into gender-related justice, spoke of the work that she and other women did during the Civil War with these words, that they pressed and they implored until they pushed the lines through. It was an active justice. As they began ever so slightly to turn the theological and the patriarchal wheels, those angels on the battlefield, in Barton's words, became the saviors of men, flipping the patriarchal construct. While it's true that the whole paradigm of gender justice has continued to expand quite a bit since that, these ideas that gaining respect by strength and athletic skill and likening that to the skill that is typical only for men being needed, or that the role of women on a battlefield or anywhere is caretaking or consolation, still in her day, Clara Barton pressed the lines ever so slightly. These stereotypes still exist today, but she pushed it a little bit so that there was any place at all for women on the battlefield, and more importantly, as part of the larger movement of women's suffrage, for the place of women and feminism in society and the wider culture. She and many others pressed the lines with skill and with grit, with strength and grace, determination and hope and persistence, until she staked her own place, claimed it in her own right without help from anyone on the other side of the gender binary. She demanded justice regularly and often to keep the line moving forward. That what needed to be always happening was a continued pressing and pushing forward, and that is still true, no less true in 2017 as it was in the 1860s, to push the lines forward yet and yet again. The world needed Clara's healing skills in hands, heart, mind, and the world still needs healers for a broken world. At the end of the Civil War, in a nation torn apart, families and towns and cities, hopes and dreams and life torn apart by a brutal and a long war, they needed songs to sing. We will rally round the flag and we'll rally once again. Rally the battle cry of freedom. We will rally round the hillside and rally round the vale. Rally the battle cry of freedom. To rally round the devastated hillsides, their demolished vales, to rally round their devastated hearts and spirits with a cry for freedom and for healing. One composer, longing for some word of hope in the midst of a despairing country, Hope for some vision where families could regather, where a country could regather. Wounds of the body and the soul could be mended somehow in this vision by grace and by hard work and by commitment to rebuild their communities. In 1865, as the Civil War was ending, Robert Lowry wrote, "Shall we gather at the river, where the angel feet of the dead and the living could find holy ground, no longer soaked in blood and heartache? The angels in the midst of the battlefield, the ones offering healing and mending wounds, the ones offering vision and music and poetry and art, the ones offering water and coffee and stories and laughter, are what bring people back to whatever sense of wholeness is possible after the devastation of war." So often these religious visions put into poetry and music in the midst of brokenness at first glance seem to be about some life hereafter, not of this world, something beyond the present, couldn't be possible. But for most who wrote them, and many of the traditions and cultures that have sung songs of liberation, they are much more about hope for this world in poetic imagery, this life, this earth, right now, a living testimony to the world they are wanting to create and live in. Clara Barton, like an angel from heaven, descended to heal the broken. So too do we have visions of hope in the midst of every modern battlefield. And the composer's aspirational hymn of healing without any reason for hope was to say, yes, we will gather at the river. Yes, even in the midst of pain and suffering, we will sing like a newborn babe. We will join hands uninvited, unaided, unsanctioned. We will gather with a melody of peace and of justice and begin building the world for which we hope. We will infuse this world with song. The hymn is "Shall We Gather at the River?" Let us sing together.